Welcome to Open Scrolls. Today we open a story that has carried faith through generations. Daniel in the lion's den. This is not only a story about danger and rescue, it is a story about identity under pressure, about jealousy that turns into betrayal, and about a faith that refuses to be bought, hidden, or negotiated. Because there are moments in life when loyalty to God puts a target on your back. Moments when doing what is right costs you something. And that is where the truth of who you are is revealed. Daniel was not born in Babylon. He was taken there, torn from his home, carried away as a captive. They changed his surroundings, tried to reshape his thinking, and over time they aimed for his heart. Babylon was massive, brilliant, powerful. A city of towering gates, gold, feasts, visible gods, and constant music. But Daniel walked its streets with something Babylon could not understand. He had a conviction that did not depend on circumstances. His body was far from Jerusalem, but his soul stayed anchored in God. From the beginning, Daniel learned to live with excellence without losing purity. He learned to serve kings without worshiping idols. He learned to speak wisdom without surrendering his spirit. And that made him impossible to ignore. Kings needed him. Leaders respected him. Corrupt men hated him. Because when one person lives with integrity, it exposes the darkness around him. Today, you will see how quiet envy becomes a deadly plan. You will see how ambition uses laws to attack faith. You will see a king trapped by his own pride. And you will see Daniel walk toward a den of lions with a peace that does not come from logic, but from the presence of God. Stay with me to the end, because this story is not only about lions. It is about what hunts you when you decide to remain faithful. It is about what God does when the danger feels final. And it is about the living God who still shuts mouths, still protects his servants, and still turns traps into testimony. It began with conquest. Jerusalem was surrounded. The temple was robbed. Sacred treasure became war spoil. And among the captives was a young man named Daniel. He was not a warrior. He was not a rebel. He was a young soul with a tender heart and an unbreakable will. They brought him to Babylon to shape him into a tool of the empire. They wanted to educate him, train him, polish him. They wanted his gifts to serve the crown. But what they did not understand was that Daniel's true king did not sit on a throne of stone. His king ruled forever. Inside the royal court, Daniel and his friends faced their first test. It was not a lion's den yet. It was a table. The king's food, the king's wine, the king's system. To many, it looked like privilege. But Daniel saw deeper. He understood that faithfulness is decided in small choices long before it is tested in big ones. He knew the heart is formed in quiet places. So he refused to defile himself. He asked for something simple: vegetables and water. Not from pride, not from superiority, but from obedience. And for days, while others fed on pleasure, Daniel chose discipline. When the time came to compare, Daniel was stronger, healthier, clearer, because God honors those who honor him. That is the first lesson. Babylon can change your environment, but it cannot own your soul unless you surrender it. Pressure is real. Temptation is real. But obedience opens a path where God's favor becomes visible. That favor brought Daniel higher. One day the king had a dream that troubled him. No wise man could explain it. Fear filled the palace. Daniel was called in. He did not boast. He said, "God reveals mysteries." He described the dream exactly and then gave its meaning. He warned that human kingdoms rise and fall. But God's kingdom stands and will fill the whole earth. Daniel was not only serving a king. Daniel was serving truth. Years passed and rulers changed, but Babylon still glittered. Daniel remained steady like a rock in moving water. Then came a night of arrogance, a banquet where sacred cups from the temple were used to praise idols. Laughter, music, pride, and suddenly a hand wrote on the wall. The room went cold. The king's face drained of color. No one could read the meaning. The court's wise men tried to invent an interpretation to earn reward, but heaven does not bargain with lies. Daniel was brought in, and he did not soften the truth. He said the message was a warning. He said days were numbered. He said Babylon would be divided. He said no army can change the will of God. Daniel spoke with courage because he did not depend on human approval. He depended on God. And just as Daniel said, it happened. Babylon fell. The Medes and Persians took the kingdom. A new king rose, Darius, and he noticed something in Daniel. He saw diligence. He saw honesty. He saw a man who would not steal, would not take bribes, would not manipulate. He saw excellence that could not be explained by intelligence alone. So he promoted him and made him chief administrator. That is where the real conflict began. Because when God lifts someone up, jealousy wakes up. The other officials felt humiliated. They said Daniel made them look bad. They searched for corruption, but found none. They could not trap him in fraud. They could not accuse him of theft. That purity made them desperate. So they went after the only door left, his faith. They watched Daniel and saw his pattern. 3 times a day he prayed to his God, not hidden out of fear, but steady out of love. And they smiled. Because evil does not always attack with force. Sometimes it attacks with strategy. They called it Daniel's weakness, but it was actually his strength. They went to the king with flattering words. They fed his ego. They made him believe his popularity had reached such heights that for 30 days no one should pray to any god or man except him. And the king, intoxicated by pride, signed a decree. Anyone who disobeyed would be thrown into the lion's den. With one seal, Darius thought he was securing his power. He did not realize he was sealing Daniel's test. When Daniel heard the decree, he did not panic. He did not call for negotiations. He did not search for loopholes. Daniel did what he always did. He went upstairs, opened his window, and prayed. That moment is the center of the story. Because the miracle does not begin in the den. It begins in the decision. Daniel had to choose between the visible king and the invisible God, between comfort and faithfulness, between saving his life and surrendering his soul. And Daniel chose God. The men spying on him rushed in with accusation. Ready, they dragged him before the king. And when Darius realized what had happened, his face changed. He valued Daniel. He knew Daniel was loyal. He knew Daniel was the best man in his administration. In that instant, he understood he had been manipulated. He tried to find a way out. He searched the law. He looked for precedent. He looked for a legal doorway to save Daniel. But the law of the Medes and Persians was binding. Once sealed, it could not be reversed. The king was trapped by his pride. Daniel was sentenced because of his faith. Darius looked at Daniel with sorrow. Daniel looked back with peace. Daniel did not scream. He did not curse. He did not beg. He simply said his God would protect him. That was not a poetic phrase. That was a life built over years. Night came. They walked toward the den. A dark place, cold and damp, smelling like death. Hungry lions, roaring like thunder. A punishment designed not only to kill a man, but to terrify everyone else. Darius came with them, not out of cruelty, but out of conscience. He wanted Daniel treated with honor. Even here, Daniel was still worthy of respect. They lowered him down. The stone was rolled. The air changed. The den swallowed him. They sealed the entrance. No one could open it. The king returned to his palace. But he could not eat, could not listen to music, could not sleep. His soul was restless. Because there are nights when power cannot silence regret. And while above ground, the king wrestled. Below ground, Daniel entered the place where faith becomes sight. where threat becomes an altar, and where darkness becomes the stage for God's light. Inside the den, the danger was real. Daniel was not imagining lions. This was not a soft story. These were wild animals. Jaws built to crush bone, eyes glowing in the dark. But Daniel was not alone. At some point in the night, God sent his messenger, an angel, not to give a speech, but to act. The angel shut the lions' mouths. And what should have been Daniel's last night became a night of protection. Picture it. Daniel breathing slowly. The roaring quiets. Heavy steps stop. The threat stands still. Not because Daniel is strong, but because God is faithful. That is the lesson. There are moments when faithfulness will lead you into places you did not choose. But if God allows you to enter, He has power to keep you inside. The den does not always mean abandonment. Sometimes it means testimony. Sometimes it is the exact place where God proves He rules what wants to devour you. At dawn, the king rose early and ran to the den. His voice shook as he called Daniel's name. This was not a royal command. It was a desperate plea. Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God been able to deliver you from the lions? And from below, a calm voice answered, Long live the king. God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths. They have not harmed me. The king froze in shock. The stone was moved. Daniel was lifted out. They examined him, and there was no wound, no mark, not even a scratch. Because God's protection was not partial, it was complete. In that moment, Darius understood what Babylon and Persia refused to believe. Daniel's God was not an idea. He was alive. He heard prayers. He defended the faithful. He honored those who would not bow. When Daniel came out alive, justice moved. The men who planned the trap were exposed. They could not hide behind the decree anymore. Their intent was clear. They were not protecting the kingdom. They were destroying an innocent man out of envy. The king spoke with authority. He said their own actions had written their end. They were thrown into the same den they prepared for Daniel. This part of the story is hard, but it carries a warning. Traps built for others can become judgment for the one who set them. Evil does not always win. Sometimes it falls into its own pit. Then Darius wrote a new decree. Not a decree of pride, but of reverence. He declared that the God of Daniel must be honored across the land. He proclaimed that God is the living God, that His kingdom will never be destroyed, that His dominion will never end. He said God delivers and rescues and performs signs and wonders. Here is one of the strongest lessons in the story. The faithfulness of one person can change the atmosphere of a nation. It can touch the heart of a king. It can force an empire to admit there is a higher power. Daniel never returned to Jerusalem the way he longed to. He lived far from home. He served in foreign courts. He walked through halls where idols were praised, but he stayed clean. He stayed steady. He stayed useful. Because some people think they can only be faithful when life is easy. Daniel proves the opposite. You can be faithful in a hard place. You can be holy in a corrupt system. You can be light in a city of shadows. You can honor God while still working with excellence. Daniel was not strong because he was comfortable. Daniel was strong because he was convinced. And that brings this story toward us. What do you do when pressure surrounds you? What do you do when obedience costs you? What do you do when the world tells you to stop praying, to stop standing, to stop being different? Because real faith is not measured when nobody is watching. It is measured when everyone is watching, and there are consequences. Now let the story speak to your life. Because the lion's den is not always a cave with stone and chains. Sometimes it is emotional. Sometimes it is a season of threat. Sometimes it is a betrayal you did not expect. Sometimes it is injustice you cannot control. Sometimes it is social pressure, workplace compromise, family ridicule, a friendship pulling you toward what you know will destroy you. And in those moments, a familiar voice rises. Do not pray. Do not be so serious. Just be quiet for a while. Nobody needs to know. It is only 30 days. It is only temporary. That voice sounds reasonable because fear often disguises itself as wisdom. But Daniel shows us that some obediences must stand even when the world gets angry, that some convictions cannot be put in a corner for safety, that love for God is not an accessory, it is life. Daniel did not open the window to provoke. He opened it because he loved God. He opened it because prayer was not a performance, was his breath. Here is the lesson. If your faith depends on safety, it is not faith, it is a bargain. But if your faith depends on God, you can walk with peace, even when the world becomes dangerous. And here is another truth. God does not always stop you from being thrown into the den. Sometimes He allows it. But allowing is not abandoning. Allowing can be preparing a testimony bigger than your fear. God allowed the den, but sent the angel. God allowed the night, but brought the morning. God allowed the threat, but shut the mouth of what wanted to devour you. Maybe you are in your night right now. Maybe you hear the roaring around you. Maybe you feel trapped. Maybe you are waiting for someone to move the stone. This story tells you the living God does not forget you in the dark. He can enter where no one else can. He can touch what no one else controls. He can keep you when the danger feels final. And when He lifts you out, you will carry a deeper faith and a stronger voice. Your survival will become a message to others. Not because you are great, but because God is real. We have reached the end of the scroll, but not the end of the message. Daniel in the lion's den ends with a man alive, but the purpose is that it also leaves your faith more alive. Remember what Daniel did? He was faithful in small things. He was steady in big things. He refused to be defiled. He would not negotiate his identity. He served kings with excellence, but he worshipped God alone. And when envy pushed him into the den, he did not lose his peace, because his peace did not come from palace walls. It came from the presence of the Lord. The final lesson is simple and powerful. God honors faith that will not bow. Not because God is a reward for the brave, but because God is a refuge for the faithful. Daniel was not saved because he was famous. He was saved because God is faithful. And here is what is beautiful. When Daniel came out, the king had to confess what human power always tries to deny. There is a higher king. There is a living God. There is a dominion that cannot be conquered. There is a kingdom that cannot fall. That God is still the same today. If you are facing your own decree, your own pressure, your own threat, breathe, pray, stand firm. You are not alone. The God of Daniel still hears, still sends help, still closes mouths, still brings morning. If this story spoke to you, subscribe to Open Scrolls for more cinematic Bible stories that strengthen faith and awaken the soul. Share this video with someone who needs hope. And leave a comment telling us what part impacted you most. Daniel's prayer, the trap of the jealous officials, the night in the den, or the moment he came out without a single wound. Your comment helps this community grow and helps this message reach more hearts. Thank you for being here. God bless you. And remember, when faith leads you into the den, the living God can turn it into a testimony.